Okay, Kathleen, you can take your screen to your slideshow and we will turn it over to you. This is the first Thursday of every month. The Master Gardeners partnering with the Napa County Library to bring you a topic. Tonight, our topic is success with citrus, large and small. And our speaker is Kathleen McClure. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you to all of you who are coming this evening to join us. So good evening. We're glad you're here with us today. And we're going to be talking a little bit about success with citrus trees. And I have to tell you, I've been growing them for 15 years and it's my favorite thing in the whole garden. So I'm excited to join you with this topic. But I'm first going to turn it over to the Napa librarian, to Stefana, because they do have some wonderful resources at the library that could help you if you have an interest in citrus growing. So Stefana?
Thank you, Kathleen, and welcome everyone. The first recommendation I have for you is Fruit Trees for Every Garden, written by Orrin Martin, longtime manager of the renowned Allen Chadwick Garden at the University of California, Santa Cruz. This authoritative book is a solid, science-based approach to growing organic fruit. It covers everything you need to know about fruit trees, including the feeding and care of citrus. It will help you build the tools you need, from tree selection and planting practices, seasonal feeding of nutrients, and pruning tutorials to develop a healthy environment for your trees. Now, once your trees start producing, what are you going to do with all that fruit? Well, take a look at Citrus Recipes That Celebrate the Sour and the Sweet by Catherine Phipps, and this book will guide you. This is a fun book that could help you decide what to do with all that glorious citrus fruit. Lime pickled red onions is a simple recipe that would be a delightful accompaniment to a sandwich or a salad. And browse through the book and you might be enticed to try fennel and lemon dauphinoise or linguine with lemon and asparagus. Now they sound fancy, but the ingredients, they're easy to find in our local markets and our gardens, and they're relatively easy recipes to follow. Of course, there are desserts to try too, and there are a few cocktails in here too. So these titles, they're both available to you at your local library, so please stop in and check them out. Back to you.
Thank you, Stefana. It's just wonderful to hear those recipes already. So just to get us warmed up here, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who are we as the Master Gardeners of Napa County. We're a volunteer organization and we've gone through a course through the UC Extension, and our mission is to offer research-based information to the gardening public. So if you happen to be joining us on this Zoom from outside of Napa County, some of the information that will be shared tonight might not be specific to your local climate. So you can check with your local county master gardeners for information that might be pertinent to your specific area, but we'll talk in general as well. And then at the end of the survey, at the end of the presentation tonight, the statewide master gardeners would like to send you a follow-up email. It's about 6 weeks after this program today. And if you'd like to opt out of this survey, please put a note in the chat with your first and last name and we can remove you from the list. But we love to hear back from you because it helps us to really customize our program to the interests of the community. And it would be very helpful to us to hear your feedback. So we hope to hear from you on that. Also, throughout the presentation, if you have questions, just type them into the chat. And at the end, we will have time to answer some of those questions if we can. And we'll work on those together to help you with whatever you might need to know. There are also additional resources at the end of the slideshow. So now we're just going to get started a little bit this evening with how do you grow citrus, and it's a huge topic. We are so fortunate that California is one of the best places to grow citrus of many, many varieties. We have the ideal Mediterranean climate for citrus growing, and there's a lot to learn and talk about. Today, we're going to touch upon some of the key points in this short time we have together, and hopefully you will then research on your own to choose a citrus tree that might just be just right for your garden. Here's some of the topics that we're going to cover this evening. Just some interesting things about citrus to know. what sizes are available for citrus and how are they grafted, how they grow in your garden, how to select some varieties for our area, a little bit on how to plant your trees well, fertilizing, irrigation, and frost protection. Those are all we're going to cover tonight, as well as a little bit of minimal pruning. They're really super easy to prune. And a tiny bit on pest and disease control. Luckily, citrus trees do not have a lot of pest issues, so they're actually pretty easy to control. And then I'm going to cover a little bit too about how to grow them very successfully in containers. Surprisingly, citrus are one of the trees that grow very, very well in containers. So that's a great thing for us here in Napa. So just to get started, citrus trees originated in China, and they've been in California since 1769, so hundreds of years ago. And they were originally planted by Father Junipero Serra in the San Diego Mission area, way down in the south of the state. And from there, over the years, they continued to thrive, and then they began planting them further and further northward into Riverside. And of course, that was a huge commercial area in Riverside and became known as Orange County, and it became what is now Orange County today. And just a little over 100 years later, they were here in Northern California near Oroville. So they've been a major commercial industry in the state of California for a long, long time. And surprisingly, the Washington maple is one of the most popular ones here grown in the state. And overall, California and Arizona, those two states, produce 80% of our nation's fresh citrus, fresh eating citrus. Florida has a huge citrus crop as well, but many of those varieties are used for juice. So for eating out of hand, California and Arizona are the big producers. So it's wonderful. Now, a resource for for you to know about is that UC Riverside has for years, decades actually, they've been one of the leading research agencies on citrus, and they continue to provide new information continually on clones, grafting, disease control, and all variety of information for the public. So it's a great resource for you as you're researching what to grow in your garden. And there are currently over 1,000 citrus varieties, certainly one for every gardener. Now, here you see these beautiful trees on the left. And if you're growing citrus in your garden, you really need to consider what kind of size, in addition to what kind of fruit you want to grow. Now, there are three main sizes for citrus trees. There's the standard trees that you see here on the left. They're beautiful trees, but you can see the height of the doorway and then the height of the tree. They're far, far taller than the door itself. A standard citrus tree will grow from 20 to 30 feet tall, and these are a challenge for the average home gardener because the fruit is so high on the tree, it requires a ladder to harvest your fruit. And pruning it to try to keep it short enough to about 6 feet, to try to prune a standard tree and keep it short is going to be a constant battle against the tree's natural growth pattern. So unless you have a very large space, a standard tree is probably not optimal for the home gardener. Now, the next size is what they call a semi-dwarf, and these are likely optimal for your home garden, and most often will also be what you find at our local nurseries. They grow to 10 to 15 feet, which is optimal, and they can be successful in a large pot. And you can also maintain them at that 6-foot level, which is optimal for harvesting your fruit. Now, luckily, through the process of grafting, various cultivars are available in the size you might want. So usually they can take maybe a larger fruit and graft it onto a semi-dwarf rooting stock so that you can get the size tree in your garden that you need. Now, the third size that's available, of course, is this little one on the right that you see, which is the dwarf variety. And oftentimes you'll see the smaller fruits, the clementines, mandarins, and so forth in the dwarf size. Now, if you only have a patio area and you really want to grow a citrus in a pot, a dwarf variety might be ideal. Some are as small as 3 feet They can also go up to 6 feet. So like a 24-inch pot will hold those trees very well. The one thing to think about with any tree that you choose as you're thinking about where you're going to put it in your garden is the space available must be in full sun. They really have to have full sun to grow successfully, and ideally on a west or south facing wall that will give additional reflected heat to the trees. So when it comes to citrus, and you'll hear me repeat this throughout the presentation, heat equals sweet. So as the weather warms, the fruit is going to get sweeter and more flavorful. So it's wonderful if you have a nice warm spot in your garden. I happen to have a pool with cement around it against a south-facing fence. So it gets the heat from the fence and from the cement around the pool. So my citrus trees are really happy in that location. Now, how does it grow? Unlike many deciduous trees, citrus trees are perennials. They do not go dormant completely, and they're evergreen with firm, leathery leaves year round. Now, it's very normal for all citrus trees to drop leaves, and they do them throughout the year. So you'll find that debris under your tree. It's very common. It doesn't mean your tree is sick, but the most pronounced drop will be in this month coming now, right at early spring after the frost, because any frost damaged leaves will naturally drop. And the first few years, citrus trees develop their strong root systems and have very few fruit or flowers. You can expect that. Don't think you're a failure yet at the moment, because those young trees kind of just wait and they grow very slowly at the beginning. Now, while citrus trees can be grown from seeds or cutting, the vast majority of healthy robust trees are grafted, and the rootstocks have been carefully developed over many years for disease resistance, cold hardiness, productivity, and desirable fruit qualities. And here you can see on this tree on the left, this was the original rootstock, and here is where the graft was originally put onto this tree. This tree is about 15 years old, and occasionally you'll see little sprouts coming up at the graft union. But this is what a grafted tree that's mature might look like. Now, in a typical, on this beautiful photograph on the right of the flowers, citrus trees most have perfect flowers, and they are self-pollinating for the vast majority. There are a few types of citrus trees that require cross-pollination, but for the most part, they are self-pollinating. And the blossoms may occur multiple times during the year, with the heaviest flowering coming up in spring now. And there will be many, many flowers. You'll find thousands of flowers on your tree, and some will become fruits and others will drop, and that's perfectly normal. The other thing to know is that these flowers are highly fragrant, and they're often used in perfumes. But when your citrus tree is in bloom in your garden, your entire yard will smell just wonderful. It's an enchanting fragrance. Now, mandarins, grapefruits, and pomelos are the three that may not be self-pollinating. So again, look at your cultivar and check the plant labels if you are going to need to get a second tree of those types of trees. But also some varieties do tend also to be alternate bearing. And that means they have a heavy crop one year and a very light crop, or a small crop, or no crop at all the following year. So certain varieties tend to be that way, and you'll want to know if you're purchasing a tree which those are. Valencia oranges tend to be that way. That's one of the types that has a heavy crop one year and a light one the next. Now, depending on the cultivar you have, the fruit will ripen on the tree and it gets sweeter over time. And it's common to have new flowers, small new fruits, and mature fruits all at the same time on the tree. That's not unusual. And the harvest can extend over 2 to 6 months for your typical fruits. And they also have a natural, what they call a fruit drop. Just as they drop some of those extra blossoms, some of the little small citrus fruits will also naturally drop to the ground. So that's normal. Don't think the tree is sick. And the optimal temperature for thriving citrus trees is between 70 and 90 degrees. So most of our spring and summer weather and early fall is right in that range. And if it gets over 100 degrees, the trees are going to kind of slow down and rest and trying to hold on to their energy. And if it gets below 55, the trees will also slow down, just as we've seen these past few months in the winter. They don't go dormant and drop all of their leaves, but they will kind of slow down in those extremes of temperature. Now, the next thing to think about is, what do you want to grow? If you're going to have a tree in your garden, a citrus tree, you want to think about, well, what do you like to eat? And then, of course, what kind of plant might be the best one to grow in your garden? Now, there are so many kinds of citrus, so choosing what you like to eat first is your first step. And then what season it will ripen, or planning the ripening over time if you have room for more than one tree, so that you can stretch out your harvest time. These are all decisions to make. Now, at the top here in the red ink on the slide, you'll see that resource for the citrus variety at UC Riverside. That's, again, back to that great resource. They have a full page on their website on each variety, telling you everything about it. So it really helps you in your selection process. And there are hundreds of varieties and rootstock selection that can help you. In general, though, this chart will give you some ideas about which categories are most tender, most tolerant to frost, as well as those that can handle some temperatures as low as the mid-20s. So once you kind of have an idea of what you might like to grow, spending some time reading from that resource about the unique needs or attributes of a particular variety that you would like will help you to come up with a good match for your garden. And then, of course, getting your fruit tree from a reliable nursery will really help. So just in general, if you look at the pictures here, the fruit on the left is my newest little tree. This happens to be what's called the Kishu mandarin. It's a very tiny fruit. It's barely the size of a golf ball. Some of them are almost like the size of a ping pong ball, but it's a lovely little, easy to peel mandarin. And the little segments are totally seedless. It's very sweet. It's a lovely little small tree if you wanted one for a pot. And if you look into the most cold hardy column here on the right, the calamondin, the satsumas and mandarins and tangerines, and the kumquats, lime quats, orange quats, and the improved Meyer. These are all trees that are very cold tolerant. 22 degrees for the improved Meyer and even down to 15 for some of the mandarins. So if you have a colder spot in your garden where it gets sun, but it gets kind of cold in the winter there, these are the most cold hardy fruits. And the opposite would be your most tender on the left column, the citron, the Buddha's hand, some of the varieties of lemons, and most certainly the limes are very tender. And you'll have to do more frost protection if you want to choose one of those varieties. And then the middle column is really kind of, they can handle kind of to the high 20s, 25, 28 degrees. These are your sweet and sour oranges, like your Valencias, your navels. Blood oranges can handle mid-20s, the pomelo and the grapefruit. So if you've got kind of middle area, you can get a tree that can handle those temperatures. This one on the right, by the way, happens to be the improved Meyer. That tree is a 6-foot tree. You can see it's totally covered with fruit. And I have never had to put frost cloth over that tree, and it's never had any frost on it in my garden over the 15 years. It's a very, very frost tolerant tree. So that's a good one to know if you like Meyer lemons. Now here's a few sweet citrus varieties just to kind of give you an idea of what to look for. And one of the things to think about, of course, I've got a column here for hardiness and the temperatures that those trees can handle. And then here is the size of the tree. Now, all of these would be if they were semi-dwarf, not on the standard rootstock. But you can see some of them are really small, like that Kishu mandarin or the satsuma here. These can be between 3 and 6 feet. They can be easily put into a pot. And you'll also notice that they ripen at different times. And this is something to think about, is when is the ripening time for the fruit? This satsuma would be very early from our spring blossom time. Early as November, you could be harvesting your fruits of that satsuma and have satsuma mandarins for Thanksgiving and Christmas time. And that Kishu is ripe from December to January. But notice on these two, These are only able to be staying fresh on the tree for about a month. And then they must be harvested. So you have to eat them quickly because the skin is so thin, they will eventually start to spoil on the tree. Whereas if you have a little more space, this clementine, which is the Cuties, the brand that they call Cuties, that's the commercial name, but it's also known under clementine or Algerian tangerines. They have a longer hang time on the tree from February to April. So depending on the variety, you can choose what tree and when it will ripen for you. And then here you can see some that hang way longer on the tree, this golden nugget variety, the navel, the Washington navel. That one will actually be looking ripe as early as December. It will look bright orange, but it will not be sweet at that point. And so the rind color is not something that's the only attribute you're looking for. It will sweeten as we get this hotter weather in the spring, and they're much better in March and April and into May. And so really, as you're thinking about your tree, look for the qualities that you're asking for, what you like to eat, and when it will ripen, and how big will the tree be, and then planning on frost protection if you need one that has a mild frost tolerance or a big frost tolerance. And here's a few sour varieties to consider. If for those of us who like sour fruits, everything from the Eureka lemon improved Meyer and then the kumquats, which are very unique. One thing to think about here also as you're choosing a sour citrus is what is it easy to find in the store and what is harder to find. I know for me, the first tree I ever planted in my garden was the Eureka lemon. And it's just a fabulous tree. It's always ever bearing, has lemons all year round, blossoms, green fruits and ripe fruits all the time. I have enough fruit to give away to my neighbors, to the little children who want to do the lemonade stand, all that I can eat and more. The one downside of the Eureka lemon, it's a very vigorous tree. It's very thorny and they tend to get kind of leggy. So it requires a little more pruning just to kind of keep it under control. Another choice for a sour variety might be your improved Meyer. These are delicious citrus, a little bit less tart than the Eureka, but very difficult to find in the market. So if you like that improved Meyer, and you could have one in your garden and then have that fruit in your yard. Kumquats, again, are also a very short season in the market. Now, one that's an interesting one is the Rankper lime. This is a cross between a lemon and a mandarin. It peels like a mandarin. It's orange colored on the outside, but tart on the inside with a little more of a flavor between a lemon and a lime. So limes are tricky for our climate here in Napa, but the Rankper lime is a nice big tree that is kind of a comparable one to use if you want to use for cooking like mandarins. And then here in our climate, the bears, Persian and Tahitian limes do fairly well. They still can only handle up to 32 degrees. So you've got to do some more frost protection for those. But again, they're available between October and December, and they're seedless, acidic. They're really lovely fruits, and they grow pretty well here. Now, one thing to talk about would be grapefruits. Now, this one's kind of a little anomaly. The grapefruit is a really large fruit and a very slow developing maturity wise. These trees get really big, even the semi-dwarfs are over 8 feet tall. Now, they need tremendous amount of heat to sweeten up. They might turn color and look like they're ripe, but they will not be really sweet until as many as sometimes 15 months afterwards. So this tree takes like a year to get the fruit ready to grow. So you know you're going to be having that tree there hanging with fruit for quite a long time. But if for the heat wise, those of you who live in the north end of the valley up in Calistoga area where you get those hotter temperatures, this might be an opportunity for you to grow a grapefruit successfully because it really does require a tremendous amount of heat and a long time to mature. So those are just a few both sweet and sour varieties. Now on this slide, I just kind of put a synopsis for you later to look upon if you want to review. These are the different topics that I'm going to be covering really, but there's a lot of varieties. Consider the cold tolerance and the rootstock selection. Always purchase inspected plants from a reputable nursery because you don't want to spread any diseases. to our area. Consider the heat requirements. Again, heat equals sweet, and schedule your harvest times before the frost. Choose south or west facing walls against a fence. Protect from the wind too, because they can be really shredded by the wind. The leaves can be damaged. And also a low spot in your garden you want to avoid, because that's where frost will sit in the colder weather. So you don't want to have it in a low spot. They do require deep watering. We're going to talk about that momentarily, especially prior to a pending frost, because the heat will radiate a little bit of the heat from the soil. You will not fertilize at the wintertime, but you will fertilize in the spring. We'll talk about that as well. And then for young trees, you want to cover with frost cloth, wrap the trunk, or use heat lights, and we'll talk about that as well. So I just kind of put all those notes on one slide for you. So now when planting your tree, let's imagine you've chosen your variety and now you've got your spot located in the ground. When planting, springtime is optimal as they're getting ready to go into growth season now, but they can be planted all year round, so it's not a terrible problem in the ground or in containers. Now they need average soil, pH 6 to 7.5 is perfectly fine, and sandy to clay loam. And then one thing that really is important is good drainage. Even though you want the soil to hold water, but you also want it to drain well. The citrus does not like soggy soil. They will absolutely not thrive. It will kill the tree. And they need full sun and wind protection. The roots are very fragile, and they're in the top 2 to 4 feet of soil, even in a mature tree. But they will spread to twice the width of the drip line. So when you're planting, you want to dig a hole twice as wide as the root ball. Grasp the tree below the graft union, and then place the pot into the hole, and then kind of slit down the side of the pot and carefully pull that away. The roots are very fragile on citrus trees. And again, you're going to put it in there into your soil, cover it again. No soil amendments are put in or fertilizing at the first time when you're first putting them in for transplanting, because they need to be focused on developing their roots and settling into the soil. And the other thing is to keep your root ball from the container that you got it from the nursery about an inch above the soil around it, because the roots are right up there at the surface, and you don't want to have the water just go into the surrounding soil. So a little bit above the surrounding soil, and then leave the soil that was there exposed so that the water can go right in. Now that's how to plant them. Now the guidelines for planting in pots. This is a little tricky, but they're so successful in pots, it's worth thinking through. Now, first off, you want to keep in mind that many of these trees will eventually be maintained at 5 or 6 feet tall. And they will also have times in the year that they're very heavy with fruit. So think about where you want to have the tree, because you're going to have to move it. If you have to move it around to keep it in the sun, you've got to consider the weight of your pot and the weight and height of the tree. So also think about what kind of pot would best support the tree without tipping over. That's really important. Now on the left here, you'll see on that little graph, there's some rough estimates of just the amounts of potting soil that's needed for various sizes of pots. Now a very young citrus seedling can be in a small 3 to 5 gallon pot for the first several years. That's fine. Even a 10 to 12 inch pot, they can be in there for a couple of years. However, by year 3, after that red line, it's time to transplant them to the next size pot up. Now resist the temptation to just take the plant, the 1 gallon plant, and put it into a 24-inch giant pot, even though you know it might need that over the period of years. Because you want it to have enough room for slow, steady growth. And a small tree with small roots in a large pot is going to be a real challenge to maintain appropriate water that stays near the root zone. The water is going to want to spread out across all the soil, and the roots aren't there. You want to have it be close to the root area. So it's best to move them from just the pot they came into the next size up, 1 inch or 2 larger, and then you're going to tip it over to its side, carefully slide out the tree with its roots very carefully. You're going to prune the roots ever so gently if there's wrapping around the pot or any dead or diseased roots, and then you're going to refresh your soil and then put them into the next size up pot. They are amazingly successful. And a 24-inch pot like this big one at the bottom column on the left, a 24-inch pot, which is 25-gallon, that can hold a tree 15 years more. So you don't need even bigger than that. A 24-inch pot that's deep enough will be sufficient for your trees. Now on the right side, this chart really shows to you the attributes of the different kinds of pots. So ideally, a citrus tree will have a pot with a cylinder shape, sturdy base, drainage holes, and a good water retention that still drains well. And you can also place the pot on top of pebbles that are inside of a saucer, not the pebbles in with the soil, but beneath the pot on top of the saucer, so that it doesn't stay in standing water. And again, the pot should be just a little bit bigger than the nursery pot it came in. And every few years, you're going to move them to the next size. Now, a couple of things. The first category would be your non-porous pots. These would be metal, fiberglass, glazed pots, glazed ceramic pots, and the black ones that they have at the nursery. All of these are good water retainers. They can be lightweight, the plastic ones. So if you have to move the tree, it's easier if it's in a lighter weight pot, but the black pots can trap heat that can kill the roots. And the ceramic ones can be really heavy and hard to move. So you've got to think about which is best. Now, the next category would be your semi-porous pots, like your wood ones, your half wine barrels. They have a natural look. They hold up to weather changes. The risk there is that sometimes the wood can hold water and may be conducive to getting fungus or rot. So that's, the negative side of that one. And then you've got the porous pots, like the unglazed ceramic or clay, the terracotta pots, the mesh pots. These are affordable. They're not very expensive. There's lots of different sizes. The one downside from a porous pot is that they may require a lot more attention because the water will evaporate very quickly. And so you have to really pay more attention to your watering regimen. The other thing is that the porous clay pots can crack in freezing weather. So you have to just be prepared for that. So there's pros and cons to each type of pot. So those being said, here's some pictures for you of some different things. On the left, you see these beautiful trees. These were all 6 feet tall. They're right here at our local nursery. Most of these were 15-gallon pots, 10 to 15-gallon pots, and the trees are healthy and thriving. They even had some trees with fruit on them. So they're very happy there, but they may not be aesthetically what you have in mind for your own garden. So some choices here. Here, this cylinder shape, these two at the bottom right, the gray one and the yellow one, those would be the easiest for transplanting because you just lay them to the side and slide it out and do your root work and refreshing your soil. And that would be really easy for transplanting. This shape here is a lightweight one. This is a nice cone-shaped pot. It's plastic, it's light, easy to move. And these come in all different sizes for big trees. And this is a lovely one to put on top of these saucers where you can just put the pebbles in there. They drain well. And then the water, you don't want standing water. You want to make sure the pebbles are keeping the bottom of that pot above the pebbles. Now this one here, these black liners are very affordable. They do have good drainage. They're just a little bit smaller here for your smaller trees. But the advantage of those is you can slip one of those inside of a cylinder pot that's attractive that you like for your look in your garden, and then just monitor your watering accordingly so they're not sitting in water. Now this option on the right is for the long-term planner, I'll call that, because you can see these are all matching pots on the upper right, and they're in a series of gradually increasing sizes. So knowing that your citrus tree is going to have to be transplanted every couple of years to the next size up, if you have a series of pots like this, that's ideal. And you can just move them up to the next size up. Now here's some pots that have a few challenges just to think about as you're choosing your pot for your tree. These ones on the left are like that light beige one on the prior page, so that wonderful cone shake would be really easy to transplant. Unfortunately, these are the unglazed ceramic and they are fragile and they will lose water quickly. So you have to have, if you want those and you like that look, you have to plan for some diligent watering, and the soil can dry out. Now this one in the middle, beware of that one. It's a very pretty pot, but this curved edge here. First off, it's too shallow really for a citrus tree. This is too small of a pot, but this curved edge is going to make it almost impossible to take that soil root ball out without disturbing and breaking those roots off. So a curved top is going to be a little bit of a problem. Now this blue pot is just dynamic and gorgeous, but you can see how narrow it is at the base, and visualize a tall citrus tree laden with fruit. This pot is just waiting to tip over and break, and they're quite costly. You could put a tree inside there in another plastic pot if you like that look. Just kind of consider how you have to water it and accordingly make sure there's good drainage in that blue pot. And this black one, again, very tall, might tip easily, but the other thing is it's got that curved top, which will make it very difficult to get the tree roots changed. The other thing is it's black. It's really dark, and because of that, it may heat the roots and burn the roots of your tree. So those are just some things, you know, there's pros and cons to each one. You have to think about what you want to spend your energy on. So once you've got your pot selected and your tree selected, now you want to think about the actual fertilizing, and does it need fertilizer? Well, this is an interesting thing. The main thing citrus needs is nitrogen. They really consume a lot of nitrogen, and the young trees and the medium trees and the mature trees need different amounts depending on the size of the trunk. Now, occasionally you'll need to add additional nutrients like phosphorus or potassium every few years. Sometimes you might need an iron application. So observing the leaves on your tree is a really helpful method to determine if there's anything additional that your tree might want, if there's a deficiency of some kind. So you can contact the master gardeners. We do have a help desk, and you can show us a photograph of the leaf sample if you have some concerns about the health of your tree. But generally speaking, if you fertilize 3 times per year, first one in the spring, which is now, early March, right after the frost, another one in the summer, and one in early fall, and that'll be sufficient to keep your tree healthy. And they also sell, in addition to these balanced fertilizers, they have citrus fertilizers called citrus fertilizers, and they're just really, they have everything that the citrus trees need. You do want to avoid feeding your plants before an expected frost too late in the fall, because the citrus, when they are fertilized, we're going to send out new growth and oftentimes blossoms as well. And the frost in the early fall, or the late fall, early winter, can really damage that new growth. So you want to avoid fertilizing very late into the winter. But also, as with many plants, mulch, whether it's in the soil or in the top of the pot, to conserve water and provide for healthy soil benefits. Now, you'll notice these leaves here, and you're thinking, oh dear, these are really sick trees. But I want to tell you, at this time of the year in winter, it's common to see some leaf yellowing, like you'll see here on the lower left, because it's not a nitrogen deficiency, because I fertilized my trees just before the winter. But when the cold temperatures come, the trees are not able to draw up the nutrients from the soil. They're kind of resting. And so you might see some yellowing at this time in the year on your tree, or it could also be some yellowing from frost damage on your tree. So you want to wait and not worry yet. Give it its first spring dose of fertilizer and watch and see what happens. And if you'll notice on the right-hand side here, you'll see the same leaves that you saw on the left. But here on this new growth that's just starting last spring in March, the new growth is bright, shiny green, and healthy. And there was nothing done except that spring fertilizer in March, and that tree came right back to life without any special nutrient additional fertilizers. So some of it may just be because of the climate that it hasn't drawn up its fertilizer from the winter. Now, just in general, also to keep in mind, your plants that are in pots really need to have a consistent regimen for fertilizing, because you're the only person giving them any nutrients. In the soil, they kind of spread their roots and try to find things around them. But in the potted plant, you need to do that. So Again, you're going to do the 3 times per year if it's in the ground, but in a potted plant, it's best to do it monthly, every month, but every 3 or 4 weeks, sprinkled a little bit over the surface and watered in, and a balanced fertilizer with a light dose. You may want to go with a half dose, but water it in well in your pots. And they do need the regular feeding and the regular watering. And on that note, let's talk about watering. Watering is essential for high quality juicy fruit. In newly planted trees, you'll want a basin flood. That's going to be like where you have the little ring around the tree, and it keeps the water right where it's needed for the root development. You can also use drip emitters, but place them about 8 inches from the trunk because you don't want the trunk to get diseased. And then an additional benefit would be to use a moisture meter. Because they want to be watered deeply. You want to make sure the water is going all the way down, water deeply, water well, and then wait and let it dry out a little bit, because again, they don't want to be in soggy soil. And then they will need to have increase of water in the hot and windy weather. Certainly during our summers when we have the real high heat, you'll want to add more water, again, deeply. Again, remember that it's only top 2 or 4 feet, so it doesn't take too long for it to get down to that level. But those moisture meters, you can stick your finger in, but it only goes a little bit. So the moisture meters that go down a little bit deeper into the soil will give you a better idea of if the roots are being watered all the way to the bottom. And you can also use concentric rings of drip line, whether it be on your tree or on your pots. And they have these little on and off valves that allow you to turn the water off if the water is not necessary, and increase the water if it is needing additional water with those little valves. And just putting concentric rings around, spacing them out as the tree grows from the trunk, is an easy way to do those. And you can even put your potted plants onto the timer system, and have them just watered regularly that way. Again, avoid overwatering at all costs. That's going to be really deadly to your trees. Now, this slide about frost protection is probably one of the biggest things we really need to pay attention to here in Napa. We know we're going to get some winter frost most every year, and the trees are very vulnerable, especially certain varieties that can't handle that. So you want to choose the appropriate tree and the right rootstock for your plant. Now, for the young trees, with our nighttime temperatures in the mid-20s, you want to choose a frost-resistant variety, but you can also put sawdust or a thermal wrap around the trunk of the young trees, kind of a little wrap around, and then stuff the sawdust around it. That'll keep that graft union protected. You can also put frost protection in the canopy above the foliage. You don't want to have your frost cloth sitting on top of the leaves. It will damage those leaves. So putting something up there, could be little poles, whatever you have that you could keep the frost cloth hanging above the tree so it's not right on top of the foliage. Even the umbrellas that we use in the summertime, the 9-foot umbrellas or 8-foot umbrellas, those can even be used as a frost protection over your trees. Now, another way to protect from frost is to use what's called a C9 electric bulbs. These are the old-fashioned bigger light bulbs, and they have them in colors and clear. But you can weave those throughout the tree, and they emit heat. The newer LED bulbs do not emit heat, but the C9s do. So you can weave those throughout the tree, which will protect not only the leaves, but also the fruit. And you can also put a floodlight at the base, kind of shining up under the tree. And if you have a little frost cloth on top or an umbrella over, the flood lamp can also provide some heat to your tree. Now, don't put it too close to the trunk, because those floodlights can get pretty hot and they can burn some of the trunk. So you don't want it too close, but underneath there. And there are even waterproof timers for the lights, because we get our frost between like 1 and 6 in the morning, and you don't want to go out at 1 o'clock in the morning to turn on your C-night bulbs. So they do have waterproof timers. You can turn those on even with the remote control if you want to use those bulbs. And again, as I had said on the earlier slide, deep water prior to predicted frost. Make sure your soil is well watered, because that soil will emit some heat up to the tree. And again, for protecting, avoid pruning in the fall and winter. You want to not have that new spurt of growth. Choose a west or south facing site and not a low spot in the garden. And you may want to move your container citrus under a shelter like an eave if you need to protect it. Now, the one thing to know about the temperatures on all the charts, and when you read on your plant labels about the frost tolerant temperature, that is the temperature for the tree, not the fruit. So sorry to say, the tree may be fine, but your fruit might still be damaged in the frost. So what you'll normally see if there's frost damage on the fruit is the top side of the fruit would have like a soft spot, and it's the same color, but it's feeling squishy. And it's because the frost has damaged the fruit. And what will happen is sometimes the outside stays looking fine, but the inside of the fruit is going to start to get black and get fungus and rot. So if you see fruit or feel fruit on your tree after a frost, pick the fruit that is damaged to avoid any fungus spread among the other fruits on the tree. And you can cut off that part that was damaged, it's squishy, and just juice the rest of your fruit. So it is possible to use those, but unfortunately the fruit is more fragile than the tree itself. Now, let's go on with pruning real quickly. The good thing is pruning is so easy on a citrus tree because there's very little required. You're going to want to, in the first years, choose scaffold branches to form a nice, strong framework for your tree. Remove any suckers that are below the graft, like they might be sprouting out from there, and just ignore the rest for a baby tree. And then in years 3 to 6, you're going to actually kind of shape the tree, remove occasional branches again, form a nice framework, prune up the lower skirt above the ground. Sometimes it will have branches that are going down and they're going to touch the soil, and that causes like a path for your snails to climb up into the tree. So just pruning up the skirt about a foot up off the ground will keep the tree from touching the soil itself. And with mature trees, the main thing you're going to do is limit the height so that it doesn't get too high to harvest. You want to be able to get access to the fruit. So about 6 feet is ideal. And you may have to go in and do some thinning, crisscrossing branches, keep the skirt up off the ground. And then inside the tree where the canopy is, and there's not very much light, you want to go in and cut off with your little hand clippers, any of the little small twigs, because if they don't get light, they quite often have little dead branches on the inside of the tree. You kind of need to get in there and do a little bit of thinning to get some nice light penetration into the tree and cut up all that little dead stuff. Timing for pruning, again, you can do it all year, but optimal is early spring. Right now, just after the frost, you can cut off anything that got damaged by the frost before they flower, cut out the dead stuff, get good air circulation into the tree, and then they're ready to go. You may not need to do much unless there's a straggly branch here or there. Now, in the red ink, red flag, 2 things to really be careful for. The thorns on citrus trees. Many of them have thorns that are 1 inch or 2 inches long. These can puncture your skin and be very dangerous. So you really want to wear always, if you're working with your citrus trees, leather gauntlet gloves, the kind that come up your arm, because you want to protect your forearm as well as your hands. And the other thing is, if you're under there pruning and trying to do some work, cutting off all the little dead branches, you're going to want some sort of goggles or eye protection because the debris will fall into your eyes. So those are things for pruning to really help you. It's not difficult though, very little pruning really. So now you know all about how to grow them and plant them and prune them and fertilize them and water them. And when do I get to eat them? You're saying, when are they ready to harvest? Well, the days to maturity varies depending on the variety and the climate of your garden. So if you are planning for early, middle, or late season varieties, you could have fruit all year. So you have to know, when is it that the citrus trees are going to be ready to go? And it depends. Many of the citrus trees, the earliest blossom is going to be in spring, March, sometimes April. And the earliest ripening ones would be about 5 or 6 months later. But with those grapefruits, 12 to 18 months. So again, you need to kind of know the variety and how long it can hang on the tree. Now there's this expression called hang time. And what that is many citrus varieties can look mature and remain on the tree for 3 to 5 months. They can be picked at 3 months, but they'll be even sweeter at 4 months and maybe even better than that at 5 months. And they'll sweeten over time, especially as we get into this warmer spring weather. So the rind color is just one sign of the ripeness. And as I had talked about the navel, you'll see this one on the right-hand picture, that bright orange, beautiful navel. And you're thinking, I want to eat that one now. But you also see to the left of it is a green navel. And it's just it's going to be way months from now before that one's ready. But I can tell you the navel tree that's in my garden, those will be that color in December, and they are as sour as can be. And they look like they're ready to pick, but they're not. They're really not. So the rind color is just one attribute. My trees, my navels are best at the end of February and early March. That's when they're absolutely sweet and they stay on the tree all the way till the end of May. But all of that to say, they have a good long hang time, and you can just basically store them on the tree. You don't have to harvest them all and put them in your refrigerator. You can let them mature over time. However, two things you need to know about storing them on the tree. One is they will not stay there forever, and you do eventually have to harvest them or they'll start to get dry and pithy. And the other thing is, if too many of them stay on the tree, it can actually cause the tree to go into alternate bearing mode, because it's thinking, oh, I still have fruit. I don't need to make more flowers or fruit for next year because I still have fruit. So the tree is confused and it will go into alternate bearing. So somewhere with your variety and getting to know your tree, you have to kind of come up with when is the best time to harvest for that variety or that cultivar that you've chosen. But again, you'll find on your trees, you're going to have flowering and small fruits, mid-sized fruits, and mature fruits oftentimes at the same time. And so you, especially with lemons, you may have multiple crops per year. When you're looking for the fruit, you want to look for a heavy fruit that's nice and juicy. If they're starting to get lightweight, that means maybe they're getting on the tree too long, they may be drying out. So you don't want them to be pithy. And again, watch out for that harvest frost damaged fruit, because you don't want any spread of fungus. And the other thing you can do is, if you have clusters of fruit, thin them as you harvest. So if there's 2 or 3 that are close together, choose one in that cluster so that the others have more room to grow and spread out. Now, as far as pests and diseases, there are very few diseases, really major pests and diseases for citrus fruits. What I'll call, they have the major culprits that we typically have. All of these are on my trees in my garden, all of them, but minor as a whole. What you'll want to do is look first at the new growth. Most of these little culprits are on the new flush of growth at the beginning of the season. And here you'll see the typical culprits. We have a little bit of scale here. It's not on the whole tree. It's only on this one little branch when I looked at it. So the easiest thing to do is just go to, as I'm doing my spring pruning, cut off that branch, that little tip part, and I may be able to control it completely. Then they have snails. They kind of come up from the bottom. So again, keeping the skirt trimmed up will help them to not crawl into your tree. We also have white flies. Look on the back side of the leaf and look for those little white flies. They can lay their larvae there, and you can't even see them from the top of the leaf. And again, you can usually prune them off. Leaf miners create these little trails, and sometimes they'll get into the tree. So all of these are things that you can, with your spring pruning, usually cut off those little tips if you see them here or there, and that may control it completely. If you have a major infestation, you'll want to look at our UC, what we call IPM, which is Integrated Pest Management. That is a Master Garden resource from the University of California, and they have details of how to contain each type and control each type of these insects or problems or diseases. They have all of the guidelines for you about how to control them. You want to try to use an organic product at all possible. If the cutting off these branches doesn't control it, try to use something organic, but it will list from easiest to control the problem down to more severe infestations. Hopefully there won't be too much on your tree, because they're very light infestations. Usually they're not usually big ones. Now, the other possibilities, you may have some vertebrate pests over here like these. These are usually squirrels or rats. Occasionally with young trees, you might get gophers eating the roots. With the lemons, they'll oftentimes eat the peel and leave the sour lemon on the inside. these are rats, and the rats will eat the inside of the oranges and leave the outside. So, you can find the little evidence there, and then you can use whatever traps or methods are under the integrated pest management to control those infestations in your given tree. Hopefully there won't be much. There is one exception, and this is a kind of an important one, especially for us here in California. There is a relatively new insect problem and disease, and it's a very serious one. It's called this insect is called the Asian citruscillid, and it's a small insect about the size of an aphid. From this lower right picture, you can see it's tiny, but what they do is they suck on they're feeding with their sucking mouth parts. They're feeding on the tree and on the little branches, usually in the new growth. And they have this telltale little posture. They are at a 45-degree angle, and you'll see them kind of on the tips of the new growth this way. So this citruscillid, what it does when it's doing its sucking on the tree fluids, it's spreading from a diseased tree to a non-diseased tree. So if we see them here in Napa coming to our trees, we're going to then have an infestation, unfortunately, that can cause this Huanglong bean disease. Now, this disease causes deformed fruit and can actually completely decimate and kill the tree in as little as 3 to 5 years, and there's no cure at this moment. In Florida and the south of the United States, they've had acres of citrus orchards that have been decimated. And unfortunately, it's now in California. It started in the south. Recently, it was up as far north as San Jose and Lodi and Sacramento. So we know it's kind of creeping our way. Unfortunately, I just found out there was recently a citruscillid infestation found in Sonoma near the Napa border. So it's really close. So as gardeners, we want to be watching for this particular insect, because if you do see this in your garden or you suspect that, please contact our ag commissioner, because they will quarantine the trees and try to protect what's going on in our area, in our communities. So again, we want to be careful with that particular new one. It's really the only one that's so devastating that's new. And on that note, hopefully this information has motivated you to grow a favorite citrus in your own garden, whether in a pot or in the ground. And these are just beautiful trees, and they're well suited to our climate, and they serve as great pollinators too, by the way. You'll see bees all around the flowers. So some of you may be out of our area, and you might have to contact your local master gardeners for specifics about your community. But I'm going to give you a moment for some questions that we can do in the chat. And then I have a few more slides afterwards that are really just about resources and to show you the resources that are available. So at this point, let's open it up for some questions.
Okay, Kathleen, it's Lonnie. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so here's your first question. We've got about 6.
Okay.
First question is, for a mandarin, do you need another mandarin tree to pollinate it, or can any other citrus like a lemon tree work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it would depend on the variety of the mandarin. And I think what I would do with that case, if you really want a mandarin, I would look up on that UC Riverside website, because on the variety of mandarin, it will tell you the best pollinators for this fruit are. It will tell you if it has to be another mandarin or if it could be from another citrus tree. So I would look up on UC Riverside, because again, there's so many different varieties. I know that Kishu mandarin doesn't require a pollinator at all. So it depends on the fruit you've chosen.
Okay. You ready for your next one?
I hope so.
Okay, I think you are. When should I take the frost protection off my trees? I have mandarin, lime, and lemon. They are all covered. This person is in Calistoga. If I keep them covered, will that inhibit the blossoming?
Well, that's a great question. I have kept on the frost covering. Sometimes we'll get frost in Napa and maybe up in Calistoga, depend on your area and how your altitude is. Sometimes we even have had a lace frost as late as April. So this month of March is kind of tenuous. They will blossom even as soon as the weather starts to warm under the frost protection. They will still have blossoms. I think I would probably look for the upcoming few weeks and see. I would probably take them off towards the end of March. But if it's looking like we're still going to get this really cold weather, I'd leave them on. But they will get blossoms even with the frost protection on there. But if you were to take it off in April, at the beginning of April, they will then bloom then, even if they haven't bloomed yet. They will as soon as they get to that warmth. But the warmth is what's going to set the buds.
Okay, great. Now we have an animal pest question.
Hmm.
The question is, we have moles and voles. I've lost 2 figs planted in the ground. Are citrus susceptible to these pests? And do
They
you have
will, go
prevention
ahead.
ideas?
They will oftentimes damage the roots of the baby trees. Now, the more mature trees, no, but the moles you will want to protect, and you may want to put something around in your planting hole like they do for the, oftentimes people will put them in a raised bed. They'll put the wire around it to protect that root zone. But the problem is with a more mature tree, I don't think they're going to bother them at all. But they will eat the fruit. Unfortunately, the little voles may climb up in there and they may get to your fruit. Now, there are traps that can be used. Because we have rats, we will put traps up in our trees, and there are descriptors on your IPM about that. But usually the citrus don't get too many with the voles and moles once they're mature.
Okay, good. Now, this next question, I think you may have answered in your talk, but you can see if you want to add anything. How can you tell if the fruit is damaged from frost? And so how do you know to pick it off?
Okay, I actually go, first off, the frost damage is going to be on the top side of the fruit, not on the bottom, because the frost, of course, is dropping from the sky. So when I'm after a heavy frost, I'm going to look at my fruit out there and say, these were looking kind of ripe. And I'll touch the fruit and I'll squeeze it. And it will be, if it's squishy, it will be squishy only on one side, which is kind of odd. If you think of an overripe fruit, it usually is overripe all the way around. But with the citrus, if it's frost damage, you'll see it on the top. Now, if you have fruits that are still really hard, like they're green and they haven't even begun to ripen yet, sometimes the frost won't damage those at all. The other way you can know is that usually the frost damaged fruit will drop to the ground. It just tends to start to spoil and the tree starts to drop them. But I would feel the fruit for those squishy spots. And sometimes if it hangs on the tree long enough, you're actually going to see discoloration. It'll get darker. The skin will get darker and it will actually, how can I explain this? You know how the citrus peel has like a texture, like this little bumpy texture? Kind of, it has like little pores, like your skin looks. Well, when it's frostbitten, it gets like little tinier holes. It's like it's shrunk up. And so you can sometimes even see where the frost damage is, because it'll be a slightly darker color on the rind and it might have the dots closer together.
Okay, good. Next question. I inherited 4 beautiful citrus trees at my new property. How can I determine the variety and the maturity of these trees?
Wow.
One of the 4 trees has 3 types of fruit on it: grapefruit, orange, and lemon. Any special care not covered in this presentation for a multi-fruit tree?
Oh boy, that's a challenge. Now, multi-fruit tree, a couple, I got to go a lot of questions there. First off, to identify the variety, I would start with looking at the fruit itself once you have some fruit, and look at the qualities and descriptors of that fruit and see if by looking at UC Riverside, you can match it with, narrow it down, to a couple of different varieties. I know to nail it down specifically, you would probably have to bring some tissue samples, and that's expensive to have, to bring it to a scientist to absolutely determine for sure. But I would look at the fruit attributes and see if you could kind of narrow it down. Like, for example, does it have seeds? What's the size of the fruit? When is the ripening period? Is it May? Is it July? Is it December? how long does it stay on the tree? Those are different attributes that you could look at and look at the resource guide from UC Riverside. So now, as far as the triple tree, it's interesting. There's a grapefruit and an orange, and what was the third one? A mandarin?
A lemon.
A lemon. Oh my goodness. So you have that grapefruit tree will probably be wanting to dominate. It will probably require more pruning to keep it from taking over, because it naturally is going to want to just be the biggest tree of those three. Now, it might not do that if it, I don't know, but you may have to prune the grapefruit back a little bit more to keep it from dominating. Now, the lemon and the orange are pretty close to the same size normally, but your frost protection, I would frost protect for the most fragile of the three trees, which, you know, you might have to do frost protection anyway, just for all of them, just because the mid-20s is probably the lowest you could go. So I would probably cover the tree with frost, but I didn't, you may have to do a little bit different pruning on all three sides to keep one from dominating, so you get all three kinds of fruit.
Ooh,
Did I miss everything there on identifying the tree?
yeah, I think you hit
Okay.
it off. So the next question, Bob
Oh,
wants.
wait a minute. I thought of the other one. How old are the trees? You want to know?
Oh,
Measure the root diameter. I mean, the trunk diameter. The smaller the tree, the younger the tree. So the bigger it gets, like my trees that are 15 years old, they probably have a crisscross diameter, 12, 14-inch trunk. Whereas if the trunk is only 3 inches diameter, it's probably less than 10 years.
okay, that's a good
Yep.
tip for people.
Okay.
Bob wants to know what you think about burying a porous pot in the ground.
Ooh. Huh. I haven't ever heard of that one. That's a great question. I think it could be done, because I mean, it would just, but I would think you'd really have to watch the watering, because the water is going to want to stay contained there. It may not drain as well. It would keep it from evaporating as fast, but it might not drain as well. You might still end up with some roots sitting in the water. I have not ever heard of that being done, but it'd be good to research that one. I hate to give a definitive answer because I'm not sure.
Okay, next question. Somebody says, my clementine tree keeps losing leaves continuously. Is this normal?
Now, they will drop throughout the year. But is it a young tree? I don't know. We don't know the
Don't
age of
know.
the tree.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will drop prolific amounts of leaves if they are overwatered. And if you start to see a lot of yellowing, where almost all the leaves are yellow, it's probably overwatering. It could be an iron deficiency. You could try to fertilize and see what happens. Now, if they're just dropping as part of the thing throughout the year, that's normal. But if they're dropping all at once, it's kind of starting to look like the Charlie Brown Christmas tree, where there's just, you know, a few leaves here and there. There's probably something else, but generally speaking, it's oftentimes overwatering.
Okay, what's the best pollination technique for growing citrus trees in a greenhouse?
I do not know, but I'll tell you what, the good thing is most of them are self-pollinating, so they don't have to be pollinated. So you don't have to have the bees come in there. They're going to form the fruits. It's a self-fruitful tree.
Okay,
Yeah, they're
so
self-pollinating.
this next one, I think you may have touched on, but see if there's anything you want to add. For citrus in containers, when you fertilize, should you add mulch?
I would put the fertilizer with the container. I would put the fertilizer at the top, or use one that you can dilute in water, which is ideal, because then you're watering at the same time. If you sprinkle it around the top and work it in gently to the top of the soil, I would put a layer of mulch over the top, just because the mulch is slow release and the fertilizer is more quick release. You're just going to get both. You're allowing it to get the quick shot in the arm it needs, and a half dose each month. But then that mulch is going to keep the soil moist at the surface without it drying out.
Okay, we're almost done. We have one more question.
And we're almost out of time too.
Yeah, Tanya added that clementine tree is a young one. It's small. In any case, here's the last question. Are coffee grounds good for fertilizer?
Coffee grounds can make this soil, they're good fertilizer in general. I probably would not put them in a pot because it's too concentrated, but they can acidify the soil a little bit. And of course, a citrus tree wants, 6 to 7.5. So you don't want it to get too acidic. I would not hesitate to put them in a garden, mix them in with the top of the soil, here and there. But I would probably not put them in a pot just because it's so concentrated. You don't have much control over the acidity.
They're good for your worm bins and your compost pile.
Yeah, and then put the compost in
All right.
on the top.
So that's the end of the questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all. And just so you know, for the rest of the presentation, this slideshow is available on Master Gardener website. Here's what the website looks for. And we have some upcoming workshops coming up this next month and 6 weeks. So hopefully you'll enjoy those. And then at the very end of these resources, in the top one listed there is that UC Riverside link for you. So hopefully it's been a good presentation for all of you. I hope you have good luck finding some good citrus for your garden.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.